Mohit, you've spoken about Radio 4 being a public space where the nation can come together. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think what I mean by talking about Radio 4 as a public space is, firstly, obviously, Radio 4 has everything. We have comedy, we have drama, we have factual programs, we have news. So it is a place for everyone. And I think right now the nation needs a space, a calm, thoughtful space to explore the challenges we face as a nation. And so what I mean is being a place to make sense of the world, but being a place to make sense of the world in a way that feels constructive. And that's where constructive journalism comes in, I guess, because I think what we see increasingly around us is a kind of a polarized, angry, rather reductive debate taking place. And what I want Radio 4 to be is the kind of calm public space where we explore and provide understanding and history and context around the challenges we face, issues in a way that actually allow us to kind of move forward as a nation and to find common ground as well as understand where we differ.
Does that imply that in the past, the nature of debate and discussion on Radio 4 has not been as calm and thoughtful as you would have liked? Or is this changing circumstances requiring a different mandate?
I think it's a bit of both. I think certainly there are places where I think we've probably tended towards the more, should we say, bombastic kind of version of journalism where, we think we can bludgeon a politician or anyone into giving us the truth by getting a gotcha moment by somehow, and sometimes that works. I think none of this is me. I hope saying that we don't have a job to hold politicians or people in power to account, and I think sometimes the audience wants us to be quite robust in the way we do that. So I'm not denigrating that form of journalism entirely, but I do think it has now become there are so many places now where we can see that quite opinionated, quite those angry voices in the public arena, that I think our job, particularly at the moment, is to try and take a step back, take a breath, and find a more constructive way through. Because I think the other thing the audience is saying to us, and this is, I think, very true of the younger audience, is they find it really off-putting, the kind of rather kind of gladiatorial kind of high drama encounters, and they want more thought, they want more explanation, and they want more not people to agree, but to understand a little bit more where people are coming from, and to try and have a bit more of a respectful conversation. And that's what I think we're trying to do.
But how do you retain the number of listeners for a much more rational debate in the teeth of social media?
Well, I think actually people are, I think exactly because of social media, people are looking for a life raft. I don't think, I think rather, you could argue that it's poisoning the well of debate, and I'm sure there has been an element of that. But I think increasingly, we do programs like Across the Red Line, which is designed specifically to get two people who hold opposite points of view to discuss their differences, to have the political, philosophical debate around whatever it is, taxation or, whatever the issue is, but to understand where each other come from. And just literally last night, I got an email from the presenter of the program saying there was a student magazine that was reviewing it and talking about this and saying what a relief it was to see people of opposing views look and try and understand each other's point of view, where their beliefs were formed, rather than what you see in social media, which is often, very few characters, quite simplistic and often designed to grab attention rather than to provide nuance and understanding.
And to effect these kind of changes within Radio 4, did you adopt a Big Bang approach, or is it something that's gradual, ongoing work?
I think it has to be gradual and ongoing. I don't think a Big Bang would work. And, with all change, it's culture you need to change. And I think, there are two bits to Radio 4. There are many bits to Radio 4, but two bits. One is obviously the news operation, which has a particular job. And, and I wouldn't want to stop the Today programme or any of, World Tonight or PM or World at One stopping doing its job, holding politicians to account, presenting the debate in the way they do. But we can also run documentaries and other programs alongside that, trying to deepen understanding. I think there are three elements really to kind of constructive journalism. There's hope, there's understanding, and there's empathy. Those are the three kind of pillars for me. And I think as well as, and that's what we can do at Radio 4, we can kind of find ways of kind of letting all of those kind of come into the schedule. But I don't think it's through a big bang. I think it's through projects like Rethink, where what we did was we took the point at the point where the pandemic was starting to really take hold, and we were starting to think, what does this mean for us? Rather than go to the despair side of it, which is where some people were going, we said, well, what might this mean in terms of the way we reset society, reset the way we think about how we behave, how we travel, how we consume food, all those things which are part of, I think, trying to say, can we find hope at times when it feels like things are pretty hopeless? And that's, I think, part of what Radio 4 can do. Is we can do the news thing where we say, this is the news today, and some of it's grim, and that's just the way it is, and you need to know this, because that's about informing our audience. We should never, ever duck our responsibilities to keep them informed, however grim the news may be. But we can then run this river alongside it, where we're saying, well, actually, what are the opportunities that this crisis might afford us? Where are there pockets of hope? The whole vaccine story. We've got a new podcast called How to Vaccinate the World, which is all about saying, okay, as well as daily news, you're going to have this opportunity to kind of to dream a little bit, to hope that we may emerge out of this. And we can tell you all the things you need to know to give you hope, as well as the information you also need.
And by continuing to embrace a broad sweep of different kinds of journalism within the BBC, and discussion and debate, have you taken the sting out of those old dogs, critics in the BBC, who would say, no, all this solutions-focused journalism is a load of nonsense and it's not going to work? I mean, have you managed to put them back in their kennels, as it were?
I don't know if they need to be put back in their kennels. I mean, I think this is you asked earlier about whether it's a kind of big bang moment or a gradual process. I think there's been a gradual process throughout the BBC where I think, certainly going back 20, 25 years, when I think this might have been a less fashionable view and seen as a view which was in some ways a denigration, a kind of abdication of responsibility for journalism. I think journalism was seen as being a much more robust sport there. I think there's been a general understanding that if you really want to arrive at truth, if you really want to engage audiences, this is the way to do it. And just one example on that. I mean, if you take something like climate change, we have a program called Costing the Earth. We decided quite early on that it was quite clear to us that just telling the audience over and over again how terrible climate change was going to be, and scaring them essentially out of their wits, was actually having the result of them just disengaging. They just turned off. They said, we can't deal with this reality.
And your research showed that.
And our research showed that. It was very clear to us. Our research. So this wasn't about doing something because we wanted to be happy, clappy, or because we wanted to put those old dogs back in their kennel, as it were. It was simply because actually it was clear to us that if we wanted to engage the audience on probably the biggest challenge of our time, we needed to give them something to hang on to, some hope, as well as the reality of the dangers ahead. And so we started to adopt that. And I think journalists, that certainly the ones I've worked with, have understood increasingly that to engage an audience, you have to do both.
Do you see your job as affecting in some way the psyche of the nation with the range of output that you got on Radio 4?
I wouldn't be that grand. I mean, I think we have the opportunity to make sense of the world for the audience. I don't know whether I think it's a hope that if we are to affect the psyche of the nation, it is to try and encourage them to step back from their Twitter feed or their, social media feed, and pause and think about, when someone says something they don't agree with, pause to think more about what sits behind that point of view that isn't one they share. And I think one of the phrases I really have come to is, can we disagree better? And what I mean by that is, rather than rushing to condemn a point of view that we don't immediately agree with, we pause and think about it, or try and understand it better. And I think if there is a mission to change the psyche of the nation, which I think is a bit far-fetched. I mean, I don't think I don't want to overstretch the incredible reach of Radio 4, but it would be to try and just get people to spend more time empathizing and understanding and less time condemning.
And if people are going to do that in response to your programs, does that mean that the people taking part in the discussions, the interviewees, have to change, that they have to have a different approach? They have to be the kind of people who, instead of going in bang bang as attack dogs, are actually prepared to accept that the other person has a point of view which they might disagree with, but which nevertheless deserves airtime, and you don't jump in and keep interrupting the whole time.
I think that's exactly right. And I think they'll take their lead from us. So if we pit them like kind of pit bull terriers in a kind of ring against each other, they will perform in that way. And I think in the past we may have been guilty. I say we, I mean the media in general, not necessarily Radio 4 particularly, in trying to set up that, as I say, kind of gladiatorial kind of contest. I think in the way we're trying to kind of construct increasingly conversations, whether it's on our news programs or through our commission programs, I think there's more of a sense of actually you're here to explore an issue together, albeit from different points of view and perspectives, rather than to take chunks out of each other.
What do you think have been the pitfalls in the past of the relentless negativity that we've seen in some news bulletins and some news outlets?
Well, I tell you, I mean, I think it's where the perception of an issue and the reality of that issue start to really separate. So I'll give you an example. When I first came across this notion of kind of negativity in the media and started to get interested in constructive journalism was actually about 20 years ago when I was making a documentary about the death penalty in America. And in making it, this is when I was a program maker before doing what I do now, obviously. And I went to interview the late, great Christopher Hitchens, and he was talking about the way crime was reported in America, and you know this phrase that you will have come across: "If it bleeds, it leads." And it was very clear that you couldn't turn a news network on in America without crime being absolutely forefront of every bulletin, of every story. And the truth was that if you took any survey of the audience at that time in America and in Britain, their perception of crime was that it was going up, when the reality was that crime was going down. So there was a kind of growing gap between perception and reality. And that was I think, pretty clearly ascribable to the way we put crime center stage of our reporting. And often, not when I say we, I mean the media. And it was obviously reported in a very sensationalist way in order to grab people's attention, you know. And I think that for me became the first moment when I realized that actually this is not just a matter of taste. This is quite a serious issue for democracy, which is if we start to focus on things and get the proportion of their importance or what's going on out of step with the reality, you get an electorate who can't make informed decisions at the ballot box because their perceptions are out of step with what's actually going on.
I always remember Michael Gray doing a report for the Home Office back in the early 90s, where he was asked to look at violence in Britain and different countries. And he came to the conclusion, which backs up what you're saying, that the level of crime in Britain was lower than in most European countries, but the perception of crime in Britain was much higher.
Exactly.
And that was because of the way the news media in this country.
And that's one of the negative consequences of that kind of reporting.
Where do you see constructive journalism heading over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think it will, as we see the results, as we see the audience, and we know that the audience says, oh, you know, and we've just gone through, you know, we're going through one of the grimmest stories of our time. And I think, you know, we can see that some audience just turns off from it. So I think we will see, as we use some of these tactics around solutions journalism, positive journalism, constructive journalism, we try and increase the space for the public square, for common ground. I think we'll see, I hope, a re-engagement. And that re-engagement from the audience, I think, will then have a kind of virtuous effect in terms of trying to then making, I think, more journalists realise that this is a way, you know, to get that thing which is, you know, cherished above all, which is audience attention.
So in a way, could COVID, being the huge disastrous story that it is, could your coverage of COVID, by highlighting the potential for things to go right, and by looking at discoveries, vaccines, and highlighting all that, do you think that you could lay down some kind of ground rules for the future here, that people will say, yes, there are bad things happening in the world, but if I want to know what the potential solutions are, I will turn to Radio 4?
I hope so. I think, again, I wouldn't want to be oversimplistic about this. There are times when there's bad things happening in the world, and our job is to report it.
And they're definitively bad,
And they're definitively bad,
no
and
upside
there is
at
no
all.
upside, and there's no, and I wouldn't want to sound naive. And actually, another point here, which I think is important, which is one has to be careful not to find oneself by glossing over the seriousness of a particular war or a particular situation, that by accident or clumsily you find yourself siding with one side of the political debate rather than the other, because actually by basically by not taking seriously enough the threat, you end up actually supporting the other side of the argument. So,
but that's covered by layers of understanding with greater debate, isn't it?
absolutely, it is, absolutely. But I think so. The answer to your question is, I think if, as I say, the project Rethink that we're going to continue. Rethink it's a long-term project for us. We started it with the Pope, who we got to do an essay for us, thinking about how the world might address the issues of fairness that the pandemic was starting to throw up. And we're going to carry on doing that. And that is a way, I think, as we move past the pandemic, of, as you say, thinking about where can we see opportunity as well as crisis. But the key for us is always to make sure that we are, for the audience, making sure that we never are in some way underestimating the seriousness of something that might be affecting someone's life that we need to report in full because actually there's corruption or something going on that needs to be properly exposed. I mean, none of this is to undermine the journalism that we're, of course, rightly famous for.
Do you think there are a lot of people out there who don't understand constructive journalism almost deliberately because they think it's some fluffy good news story about why these men are growing carrots on a North Sea oil rig, when actually what we know constructive journalism to be is actually getting into the DNA of a story and creating greater understanding?
Yeah, I think that's right. And but I think in there, as I've said, I think there is a warning for us, which is if constructive journalism ever becomes a reason not to cover a story properly, or not to dig into the dark underbelly of some activity or something that's going on which is really affecting people's lives, then there's a problem. And I think those who suggest that maybe that is one of the potential byproducts of this focus on solutions, should be taken seriously. I don't think I would dismiss that. And I think that is a reminder to us to make our constructive journalism not the answer. This is not some sort of happy clappy endeavor, but to ensure it is one side of a two-sided coin, which also has, as you say, the challenges and occasionally the fact that actually this is a story where our job is to dig deep, to report hard, and to hold people to account, and not to look for anything constructive, because there may not be anything constructive there. It's all about balance.
So proponents of constructive journalism have to tread a fine line. It has to be a very careful balancing act, that they keep it on a serious middle road and not allow themselves to be distracted down side roads.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the same trap that journalists, I think, fell into years ago, where seeking out negative news stories because they thought they would get more attention, the kind of if it bleeds it leads kind of school of reporting. I would hate for us to go the other way and find ourselves only looking for stories which had an upside and not reporting those other serious stories that we need to keep the audience across.
So you'll be keeping a watchful eye on Radio 4's output to make sure nobody strays in any of those other directions.
That's my job, to keep them on an even course.
Mohit, thanks very much
My
indeed.
pleasure.